Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome on behalf of KIDV, Fost Plus, and myself to our webcast this afternoon, the packaging system in Belgium versus the Netherlands. We're very, very pleased to have had so many registrations, over 700 registrations for the webcast, and also not just from Belgium and the Netherlands, but also from 30 countries from right across the globe, Europe, Africa, Asia, as far afield as New Zealand. So we're very pleased to have had so much interest in this important topics, the important topics we'll be discussing today. You will get the opportunity to ask questions. We're using Mentimeter, which you'll be able to access through their website, www.menti.com. You can also access it through the link which is sent out in the chat, and you'll also see on your screen now a QR code which you'll be able to use also to get access. We recommend that you use Mentimeter on your mobile phone or on your iPad, because that way you'll be able to continue to watch the webcast on your main screen. So in terms of the program that we have today, the webcast will split into two main parts. The first part, we'll have speakers from Fost Plus, FL Fonds, Nedvang and KIDV. So we'll have introductions to the packaging system in Belgium, also the packaging system in the Netherlands. We'll then be doing a comparison between the two, looking at similarities and differences. And then we will also be looking at the supply chain and how it's organised for collection and recycling in the Netherlands. The second half of the programme today will focus on design for recycling, and we have a panel of guests there, very experienced. I'll introduce them fully later before the panel discussion to explore that topic. So please join the presentations. If you have any questions, please send them in, and after the presentations we'll have an opportunity to ask the presenters any questions that you have. So to start us off, hopefully most of you have now managed to get access to the Mentimeter. We're going to start by a question to see who we've got watching here today. So the first question is, which one of the following options best describes your company or organisation? Are you a brand owner, a retailer, producer of packaging, a waste sorter or recycler, a municipality or national government, the EU Commission, a regulator, EPR organisation, European organisation or association, consumer or other? So I think we have there, if we can put it back on the screen, perhaps. Is it possible to see it back on the screen again in terms of the results? Excellent, there we are. So we have a lot of other, but we also have a lot of brand owners in the audience today, retailers and producers of packaging, and a fair few EPR organisation as well. Well, that's good to know. Good to know who we've got watching today. So without further ado, if we start with our first speaker we have today. So we have Mick van Hever, who is a Chief Operating Officer at Fost Plus, and he's going to give us an introduction to the system in Belgium. Mick, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Mike. Indeed, I will give a short introduction to the Belgian EPR scheme. As Fost Plus, we have the intention to be the motor of the circular economy in Belgium. And here you can see the ecosystem in which we operate. So we have a lot of stakeholders working in our system. Fost Plus coordinates, finances and promotes the selective collection, sorting and recycling of household packaging waste in Belgium. We receive an accreditation from the authority, so we are a private company, a non-profit statute, and we receive an accreditation from the authorities to work, so that's our license to operate. We interact, of course, with our members. We have about 4,500 members, companies who put packed goods on the Belgian market, and they pay the system through the green dot fees, of course. We try to have a close interaction with all the citizens in Belgium because they are very important. They bring the waste in the system in the separate collection, and of course the material should be of a very good quality. So the citizens are very important stakeholders for us. And then below on the left-hand side, you see what we call the municipalities. In Belgium, the industry cannot collect waste directly with the citizens, so we need to contract with the local authorities, and they organize the collection, but according to our specifications. And then last but not least, we are allowed by Belgian law to contract sorting plants directly and also the recyclers. So we have a direct contract power also for operations. So the building blocks, uniform collection scenarios, uniform recycling scenarios. We have contracting power, we have contracts with all the different stakeholders, and we can modulate where necessary. We control the data flows. We know, as by speaking today, we know what has been collected in every municipality yesterday, we know what enters into the sorting plant yesterday, and we know what goes to the recycling plants every day on a continuous basis. And last but not least, we control the material flows, so we have contracts, direct contracts with recyclers in the field. We have a holistic approach, as you can see. So that's our main strategy. We want to offer a recycling solution by 2025 for all household packaging waste that is put on the Belgian market. So that's very ambitious. We want to collect more tons, but not just any tons. We want to collect tons of a very good quality in order to reach the ambitious recycling targets. And we want to reach these targets through very efficient collection, sorting and recycling schemes, so basic scenarios. And digitalization is, of course, a cornerstone. We invest a lot in artificial intelligence, automation, smartphone applications, etc. Recipe for success in Belgium, we have a very unique, uniform recycling scenario. So all the citizens in Belgium, they can sort according to a unique scenario, so glass through glass bins or bottle banks, paper, cardboard, packaging and non-packaging together in a door-to-door collection, and then the blue bag for all the lightweight material is also collected in a door-to-door system. The targets, here you can see the European flags, of course, mention the European targets, the Belgian flags, the Belgian targets. I won't go into the details, but just look at plastic to see the difference. The message for this slide is in fact twofold. On the one hand, the Belgian authorities have been very ambitious, much more ambitious than the European targets. Look to plastics. Where Europe aims for a 50% recycling rate in 2025 for household packaging waste, we have to reach, or we had to reach already 50% in 2020, and by 2023 we have to prove a 65% recycling rate for plastic. So two messages, the targets are much higher in Belgium, and we have to reach these ambitious targets much faster than the European average. So that sets the scene. We have to collect a lot of waste in order to reach these targets. Slide is not moving. Yes, okay, sorry. How will we reach these ambitious targets? A big lever is what we call the new blue bag. That's really a catalyst for a local circular economy. So we started in 2019 to roll out the so-called new blue bag, the lightweight fraction. In the past, the blue bag accepted only the plastic bottles, the metal packaging and the drink cartons, but only the plastic bottles. As from 2019, we started gradually to implement the new blue bag, and we opened the sorting message to all plastic packaging. And in this way, we will attract about 8 kilo of plastic packaging more by inhabitant per year into the system. It means approximately 90,000 tons of lightweight packaging more collected in the system. Now, the quantity, of course, went up drastically, and also the material became much more complex. So we needed a complete new infrastructure to sort this complex material, and we needed more capacity. In the past, we worked together with 10 sorting plants. We were allowed by the authorities to launch so-called call for projects or call for tenders. And in fact, we offered to the market long-term contracts, so 9-year contracts for sorting. We offered a continuous supply of material, big quantities of a unique quality, and we have also a very strict quality control. So we guarantee a good quality to the sorting plants. And these boundary conditions allowed investors to put the money on the table, to take the risk, and to invest in the new state-of-the-art sorting plants. So today we have contracts with only 5 state-of-the-art plants, and they will sort the 260,000 tons of lightweight material we will collect in the coming years, sort in a uniform way. And in fact, the same strategy has been used to develop the recycling capacity in Belgium. So we needed more capacity for recycling of the plastic waste. And it was also more complex, new polymers, for some of them there was no recycling market, or there is still not sufficient recycling outlet for these flows. So we also developed this part of the chain. We launched again call for projects, but this time for recycling facilities in Belgium. We offered 9-year contracts, big volumes of a certain quantity and quality of material. And also there we are now signing contracts with investors who build recycling plants, plastic recycling plants in Belgium. 3 of them are already operational or under construction and will be put in operation very soon. And there are still procedures for 2 other plants ongoing. As from this year, if the slide wants to go on, yes. As from this year, the sorting plants sort in the same way. They all sort at least 14 fractions. Flexible plants, they can go up to 15 fractions if necessary. They can change, of course, to a certain extent. And of the 14 fractions, we have at least 10 different plastic qualities. So that's quite unique today, and we will bring all these fractions to effective recycling. Now, another important cornerstone of the system is design for recycling. We have an approach for and with the industry. If we take a picture today of the declaration of all our members, what is put on the market, we see that approximately 2% of the quantity of packaging that is put on the Belgian market, 2% or 17,000 tons approximately, is not really compatible with the systems we have put in place. So there we need to act, and there are different ways to pull these 2% in the system. We want to aim for a recycling solution by 2025 for all the household packaging, so we need to convert these 2% into the system. And with the big members, we go in interaction, we scan their packaging mix, we look if it is compatible or not with our collection, sorting and recycling schemes. If not, we look what is possible to change, if another packaging is possible or not. So that's a real close interaction with individual companies or with product categories, of course. And on the other hand, we continuously try to improve our systems. If it's possible to modify the sorting or recycling scheme in the field, we will try to do so in order to stay tuned with what is put on the market. Now, an important lever in the whole system is the green dot. In Belgium, the green dot is a really is a mechanism to push towards the right direction. It's an eco-modulation tool based on the circular deficit. On the pie chart, you can see our revenues, about 2/3 is coming from the green dot, and 1/3 is revenue from the sales of the materials. But the green dot mechanism, the main principle is that it is a strong incentive for the industry to create packaging that is compatible with our collection, sorting and recycling schemes. And it's quite unique in Europe. We have an activity-based costing system, so we are really going to look what does it cost to collect a can, an aluminium can in the system, what is the value of the material, and we are going to allocate all costs and revenues to the material, and this results in the so-called green dot fees. You can see them on the next slide. I think we have a battery problem here. So here you see the different green dot fees. You see a huge variation in the level of the fees. So this is what we call eco-modulation. It is based on the chain deficit of each packaging material and based on what a member puts on the market. So the quantity multiplied with the tariff gives the contribution. So if our members are trying to put material or packaging on the market that is easily recycled or easily collected, sorted and recycled, they will pay or the invoice will be lower. On the other hand, if someone puts on the market a packaging that is really disturbative or disruptive, obstructive, then you will have to pay a very high fee. So we try to push in the right direction, of course, in close consultation with our members. This brings me to the conclusions. Amongst others, thanks to the introduction of the new blue bag, we have a high-performing system for collection, sorting and recycling. That's really necessary to reach these very ambitious recycling rates in Belgium. But we have a clear and realistic plan for the creation of a local circular economy. I think today we prove that it is possible to create this local circular economy, and it does economically make sense to try to do as much as possible on a local level. We continuously try to improve. We have an open attitude. If there is new packaging on the market, we enter into discussion and we see how we can make it compatible with our systems. But last but not least, we need you to further improve the sortability and the recyclability of packaging. We put in place a very efficient and performant collection system, but we need also the packaging industry or the parties that put packed products on the market to try to modify the packaging and to stay tuned with the collection scenarios. Voilà. Thank you very much.
Mick, thank you very much for that interesting presentation. We've got a couple of questions come through from the audience. The first one is, could you explain a little bit more about what polymers are collected and separated in Belgium, and maybe the formats as well?
Yes, so in summary, we opened the blue bag for all household plastic packaging waste. So on a collection level, everything can be put in the blue bag. The sorting plants, they sort in 14 fractions. 10 of them are plastic fractions. We have two big categories. You have the flexible packaging and then the rigid, we call it rigid containers. The flexible packaging is sorted in two qualities. We have a polyethylene film quality and then the so-called other film, other flexible fraction, so two separate qualities. And then we have 8 rigid fractions, several colors of PET bottles, a polyethylene fraction, polypropylene, PET trays, polystyrene, and an MPO fraction, that's a mixed polyolefin fraction.
Perfect, thank you. And another question, the PMD collection system, the plastics, metals and drinks cartons, is that just for householders, or is it also possible for industry and non-householders to use that system?
Yes. The blue bag is open, is available for all the citizens. We collect about 260,000 tons through that channel. But in Belgium, you have also a sorting obligation for the industry. So that means in offices, in factories, people have to sort also the blue bag. And we organize the system in such a way that these blue bags enter also or go also to the same sorting facilities. So these flows come into the same outlet channels.
And in Belgium, is it mandatory for a packaging producer to register with Fost Plus or Verpakken?
It's not mandatory to register with Fost Plus, but the law foresees an obligation for the industry, and there are two options. Either you are going to fulfill as a company your obligation on an individual basis, and then you have to report directly to the authorities on your recycling rates and prove the recycling rates that are stipulated in the law. The other option is to join an EPR scheme. In Belgium, it's possible to have several EPR schemes. Today we have two of them, one for industrial packaging, one for household packaging, but other competitors can come on the market. But today we are alone in the market for household packaging waste.
Okay, great. I think we've got time for one last quick question. There are a lot of questions coming through, which is perhaps not surprising with so many people watching, but unfortunately we do need to move on in a moment. But if we just ask one last question, are there any symbols that it's mandatory to place on packaging in Belgium to give information to the consumer about how their packaging should be sorted?
There is no obligation for the industry to mention sorting pictos on the packaging, but we see that a lot of companies, multinational members, they mention sorting logos on the packaging. As a result of that, it was a bit chaotic, or it became chaotic. You had different logos, and therefore we try to harmonize. So we have now standardized set of sorting logos that our members can put on the packaging, but it's not an obligation. It's just a proposal to harmonize these communication logos.
Okay, perfect. Mick, thank you again very much. So that's the system, an introduction to the system in Belgium. Now we're going to hear a little bit more about the system in the Netherlands. So we have a video message from Hester Klein-Langhorst, who is the CEO of Afvalfonds Verpakkingen. A short message from her.
First of all, thank you for having me and giving me this opportunity to tell you a bit more about the Dutch market for recycling of packaging waste. In particular, the role of Afvalfonds Verpakkingen. And I'm pleased to give you a short impression on how we are organized. Afvalfonds Verpakkingen Packaging Waste Fund was established by producers and importers to collectively meet the extended producer responsibilities. It is a non-for-profit organization governed by a board of directors who are themselves appointed by the producers and importers. We do anything within our powers to make sure we meet the ambitious recycle target at the most cost-efficient way possible. And by doing so, we contribute to a circular economy for packaging. High recycling rates are achieved in the Netherlands, making it one of the leading countries in Europe. The packaging chain makes a large and active contribution to improve the circularity of packaging. Due to the way we are organized, we are able to meet the high recycle targets in a very cost-efficient way. We have an extended, future-proof network that makes it possible to really make an impact. KIDV is responsible for the development, consolidation and sharing of factual knowledge about sustainable packaging based on the following principles: reduce, reuse, renew and recycle. Netfang is responsible for monitoring of packaging of the market and recycling packaging waste and contracting for sorting and recycling. NL Schoon is organized to prevent packaging litter, and Staatsgeld Nederland is responsible for the deposits on plastic bottles. Together we make a very powerful network. You can find more information on the English part of our website. The great thing is that all the parties linked to Afvalfonds Verpakkingen have their own unique position in the overall waste organization. We all work closely together and therefore are able to continuously optimize the overall waste chain. From packaging to municipality to recycler. We believe that only when we work together, all parties in the recycling chain, we can make a real change happen. And change and innovation is needed to keep meeting the recycle targets that are getting higher and higher every year. Now I would like to give the word to Bianca from Netvang, and she will tell you in detail more about the Dutch waste market. And I thank you very, very much.
Perfect. So as introduced by Hester, we're now very pleased to have Bianca Lombretz here, who is the Managing Director of Netvang. And she's going to explain more about the packaging supply chain in the Netherlands and how it's organised. So Bianca, over to you.
Thank you, Mike. I would like to update you this afternoon about how it works in the Netherlands. As Hester already told you, we have a strong network of different organizations working all together in the EPR scheme, and we all have our own role in this scheme and in the chain. Netvang is responsible for monitoring all packaging waste from the Netherlands and is also organizing the PMD chain after collection. Municipalities in the Netherlands are responsible to organize a collection, and they also organize their own recycling of glass and paper. But for PMD, Netvang is in charge to organize sorting and recycling. Municipalities receive a collection fee for the collection of the materials. And as Hester already said, Afvalfonds Verpakkingen, so the waste packaging fund, has the contact with the producers and the importers about the material put on the market and also the fee that is paid for that. Afvalfonds is also in contact with the government and is making the strategy of the EPR scheme. NL Schoon is supporting municipalities and consumers on prevention of litter. And KIDV is advising in the broadest sense of the word about sustainability of packaging. Then our recycling results over 2020. I'm happy to tell you that we reached all targets in the year 2020. And as you can see, the Dutch targets are substantially higher than the European targets. And of course, 2020 was a special year due to the COVID situation. So more people were working from home, staying at home, and therefore consuming at home. And we saw that in the numbers that we collected and recycled, especially for glass and for plastics. We saw an increase in relation to 2019. And the challenge on plastic is still a challenge, because in the measuring point of where we measure recycling is changing. At this moment, the measuring point is at the incoming weighing bridge of the recycler, and that will be the outgoing weighing bridge of the recycler. And if we compare that with the year 2019, which was a more representative year than 2020, then the outgoing weighing bridge, the measuring point there, 2019 would have a result of only 40%. And that needs to be 50% in 2025, and even 55% in 2030. So that means that there's a challenge that we have to work on with, we believe, with all partners in the chain. We need to work closely together to reach that new result. And besides working together closely, we also need to have some interventions, and I come to that later. First, I would like to explain you something about how PMD in the Netherlands is collected. So we have two main systems to collect the PMD. That is via separate collection but it can also be collected together with household residual waste. In that case, it goes to a post-separation installation where the material, and as normally that is integrated with an incineration installation, and their material is pre-processed, and useful materials are taken out, and the rest is going to incineration. Municipalities take care of the collection, and they choose the type of collection they want to provide for their citizens. Netvang is taking care of the rest. So Netvang is contracting the companies who take care of storage and shipment, but also the sorting and recycling of the material. But you can see here that separate collection is still the main system for the Netherlands. 64% of all municipalities use separate collection to collect PMD. 11% of municipalities use the combination with the household residual waste, and 25% of municipalities use a combination of these two systems, but always per area within the municipality. With residual, when it's collected together with residual waste, that's normally done in the more urban areas, because their citizens have less space to keep all the separate materials stored separately. Besides this, the municipalities also have an option to use motivators to reduce the household residual waste and increase the volumes on packaging waste. The basic system is that there is no motivator, so citizens just pay a fixed price for the whole year for waste charges. If there is a financial motivator, then citizens pay per kilo, per container, or per bag. And then the packaging material can be delivered separately for free of charge. Then there is the physical motivator. That means reversed collection. So that means that the household residual waste has to be delivered to a centrally located container. So you have to put an effort in getting rid of your household residual waste, and the packaging waste is picked up at your home. And then there is the low frequency collection. So there the household residual waste is collected at a low frequency, and the other streams are picked up at a higher frequency at your home. What we see is that all these motivators have the effect that it reduces the household residual waste and it increases the packaging waste. But there is also a challenge to it, because it tends to have a higher contamination in the separate streams. So Netvang and the municipalities work closely together to make sure that all the material that is offered for sorting and recycling has the agreed level of maximum contamination. And as I already said, it is a challenge to reach the future recycling targets. And for that, we need to do some interventions on the chain. The Department of Business Development of the Packaging Waste Fund has developed a roadmap. And this roadmap shows the interventions and the steps that should be taken to increase recycling. They also put in place a calculation model to calculate the effect of all the interventions and steps, and what the effect is on the quantities and on the cost. And this model learned us that all interventions are needed in every part of the chain to reach these final recycling results. And the 10 steps are in this overview. So the first 5 is the focus of the Packaging Waste Fund and KIDV, together with the producers and importers. That is, for instance, rethink the need of packaging material and the amount of packaging material, but also to use recycled content, standardize packaging where possible, improve recyclability, for instance with the recycle check of KIDV, and integrate deposit systems where necessary or possible. And the next 5 is the focus for Netvang, together with the companies that we work with and organizations that we work with in the chain. For instance, increase quantity of the collected material, because the more you have, the more you can recycle. The quality of the material, to bring down the contamination of the collected material. Less losses means more recycling. Improve and optimize sorting, so making use of state-of-the-art sorting installations. Improve recycling, so the same, and then with the recyclers. But also to initiate chain projects, for instance, on pet trays, to see how you can work together as a chain to improve recycling on typical packagings. And innovate recycling, for instance, chemical recycling, and putting projects in place on chemical recycling. So with all these interventions that are necessary, there is cooperation necessary with all parties part of this chain. But we believe that if we work closely together, that it should be possible to reach these targets in the future. Thank you.
Bianca, thank you very much indeed. We've got some questions coming through, some good questions. From a system operator's point of view, would you prefer to have a harmonised collection system in the Netherlands as exists more perhaps in Belgium in terms of the way that householders present their recyclables?
Well, it would make it easier to communicate, then you have one message to bring in your communication. But what is an advantage of this system is that the municipalities who are responsible for collection, that they can choose the system that they think fits best for their citizens. So there's something to say for that as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in terms of the sorting from a residual waste, which is done increasingly in some different countries within Europe, but I think in particular in the Netherlands you have some expertise in this area. There's a question here, is it as effective as sorting from separate collections?
Well, the advantage is that all packaging material is passing the post-separation installation. So if you have a separate collection but citizens still keep putting it in the household residual waste, you will never get to see it and never get the chance to get it out of the material and recycle it. And that's an advantage with post-separation, so that all the material, because it's all in one bag, all the material passes the post-separation installation. And of course, we are working together with these companies on getting the recovery higher and higher year over year.
Right. And another question here. Does Netvang have any specific investment plans with relation to sorting or recycling, or areas of focus with respect to sorting and recycling in the future, perhaps?
Mm-hmm. Okay, no, we do not have the intention to invest ourselves. But of course, we have feedstock to provide to make sure that innovations get there, and to make say long-term contracts on feedstock supply. That is a possibility. Okay,
brilliant. And the figures that you put up in terms of the recycling rate, there's a question here. Is that actually the rate for the recycling, or is that a rate for collection, or? How would
recycling rate at this moment, it is at the incoming weighing bridge of the recycling. That is the measuring point at this moment, and that will change now to the outgoing weighing bridge of the recycler. So that will change.
Okay, perfect. And I think we have a labelling specialist in the audience, because the same question is for Belgium in terms of is there a mandatory requirement in the Netherlands to use labelling on packaging to advise a consumer in terms of sorting and separation?
No, I don't think that it's mandatory, but of course there are some standard labels and logos to use on packaging material.
Perfect. Bianca, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Great. And so now we've heard from an introduction from the system in Belgium and the system in the Netherlands. Now we've got Karen van der Straat from KIDV, who's a packaging expert with them, who's going to look at the differences between the schemes in Belgium and the Netherlands, and also the similarities as well. So Karen, I'll pass over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mike, for this introduction. I'll give a short presentation with the most important similarities and differences between Belgium and the Netherlands. I realize that it's an overview. I'll repeat some of the things that Mick and Bianca said before and try to sum up things and also make them comparable. We try to compare the both countries and see if they, where they match and where not. But first, an overview, sorry. What we compared in the analysis that we did together with Fost Plus is the EPR system. So we looked at the different system, how it's done. We looked at the packaged products and the producer responsibility fees. We looked at the collection. So how is the collection organized, the sorting and the recycling. But first, what we see in these two graphs is that both Belgium and the Netherlands are absolute champions in waste recycling, packaging waste recycling, I have to say. As you can see at the left graph, we are at the top of the scale. I have to say, as Bianca explained, this is the old measurement point, 2019 numbers, and that's going to change. Maybe our position is going to change, but right now we are champions in this. Then we see at the right one the amount of packaging in kilograms and the recycled part of that. There we also have a similar setting, similar place in the graph, and together with Spain, we are there quite close together. The important similarities. As you could hear, we have a not-for-profit EPR system. And in both of the countries, there is one system for household waste. Belgium, of course, has also the system for the waste of businesses. The EPR is organized on behalf of the producers and importers of packed goods. So they are the ones that are behind the EPR system. If you look at the packaged product, you see that both have a cost-based approach for fees per materials. So the cost of the recycling or sorting and recycling will justify the cost of the fee, or the height of the fee. The goal of design for recycling is identical. We move towards more recycling and a higher quality of recycling. The criteria are similar, and we're basing it on existing infrastructure. If you look at the collection system, we have identical collection systems for glass, paper and board. The PMD Plus in Belgium resembles, as Mick explained, PMD Plus is the recent expansion of the blue bag, and it resembles the PMD as it is nowadays in the Netherlands. The collection is the responsibility of the local authorities. And if we look at sorting and recycling, we see that sorting and recycling both have an identical technology, which is also used throughout the entire Europe. And especially for recycling, we're using the same market. So material from the Netherlands can be recycled in Belgium and the other way around. But then we get to the differences. And if you look at this slide, it's coming there, it's a lot of text, and that is because, of course, we have a double amount of information there, but you also get a little bit more into details. If we look at the first column, the EPR system, you see, and you heard Mick say that before, we go from quality to quantity. So in Belgium, they started out with the flasks, and they moved up with the PMD Plus, the big new blue bag, to more quantity, so more material. In the Netherlands, we go from quantity. We had a very high target at the beginning and had to reach that, to more quality. Although you heard Bianca said that quantity is still an issue, because if you have more quantity, you can get more material and get more quality out of it. So we're moving, and we're looking alike a little bit more in that way. So cooperation with national authorities, it's a little bit different in Belgium than in the Netherlands. What you see in Belgium is that there's a very close cooperation with national authorities. The cooperation in the Netherlands is the cooperation looser, is different. There's just a high standard, high bar. And the way that the municipalities have to work with that, and all the partners in the chain have to work with that, is differently. Different organizations also for B2B and B2C, and in the Netherlands, one organization for both B2C and B2B. The expansion of the system results in an increase of number of fees. We see that the 25 fees for the household waste, including 14 fees for recycled material. And we see that in the Netherlands, the refinement of the system led to 12 fees for household waste, including one bonus fee for good recyclable. And in the Netherlands, a big difference is that we have a deposit for PET bottles. If we look at collection, already said, local systems adopt national collection scenario. For PMD, one system of collection and one set of sorting rules for consumers. So it's very clear in Belgium what you have to do as a consumer. But again, what Bianca said, it's very different in the Netherlands. But then again, it's adaptable to what the municipalities can do. The experience with PMD in Belgium is quite long, since '94, and in the Netherlands since 2008. So, but they are looking like a lot more and more. Sorting and recycling is looking alike also more and more, although we have 14 fractions in Belgium and 10 in the Netherlands. One big difference that is there is the quality specifications. In Belgium, you have they have their own quality specifications. In the Netherlands, and they use their own sorters, as Mick explained earlier. In the Netherlands, we looked at Germany a lot in the beginning. So we're mainly aligned with the sorting specifications with the German DKR system. And the material is sorted in the Netherlands and in Germany. Due to the big amount of sorting fractions in Belgium, PS is a separate stream, which is not the case in the Netherlands. So there we go in depth, a little bit more my comfort zone, that's clear. On the design for recycling guidelines. And the consequences for companies at first. Consequences for companies are, as you will hear later on, that the declaration is different, completely different. You look at 25 fee categories, including 14 for recycled in Belgium, and in the Netherlands you have 12. And you can't compare them both, so they don't look, you just can't match them easily. So for a company, like for instance Albert Heijn, as you see later on, the declaration is quite complex to make it in a good way for both of the companies. In both countries you can work on a prevention plan. So for larger companies in Belgium, they have their own prevention plans, and in the Netherlands it's sector innovation plans. What you see is that the prevention plans for larger companies is individual and a little bit more strict, and in the Netherlands it's collective and a little bit more free. If we look at the collection, we see innovation by continuous improvement. So the continuous improvement moves. For instance, that you have 2018 and 19 to work on a new system for the blue bag. In the Netherlands, it's more disruptive. So the changes are more disruptive because we have this government that says, yeah, this is the goal you have to reach and you have to find your own way to reach it. That makes it more disruptive because then, well, changes have to be more ad hoc. So this is the new legislation, and in 6 months' time or a year time, you have to make sure that you reach that. Well, and of course, if you have more value stream, you have more specific applications, which is also interesting for companies because if they want to buy recycled content, it's also available for more kinds of materials. So that's a little bit about the consequences for companies. Then the design for recycling guidelines. The principles are the same. Both have as a basis to help improve recyclability and give practical instructions to the professionals that are using the guidelines. They are based on the current infrastructure, so that is at hand at the moment. They are drafted and updated in cooperation with packaging, sorting, and recycling companies. So the entire value chain is added on, is working on these design for recycling guidelines, and they're linked with the fees and the eco-modulation. And they all lead to a recyclability classification. The criteria for most materials are identical, as well as for the sorting and the recycling. If you look at the setup in Belgium, the design for recycling guideline is guiding. So it's an actual guideline. The in the Netherlands, it's judging. So it says yes and no. If you look at the eco-modulation, we have higher fees for undesirable end of life. So if it's unwanted, it becomes more expensive. In the Netherlands, if it's wanted, it becomes cheaper. So that's a different way of approaching as well. The classification is a little bit different, but I'll get to that in the next slide. And yeah, I think that's the main thing for here. So you see that's quite a lot of similarities, but some differences. We made a first comparison with both of the countries. So what we did is plot the categories from Belgium on the horizontal bar and from the Netherlands on the vertical bar. So what you see is the categories recycled, valorized, non-valorized, hazardous waste, and obstructive. Then you have good recyclable, reasonable recyclable, limited recyclable, not recyclable, and not allowed from the Netherlands. In that, we plotted some of the materials. This is not complete yet. This is something we have to work on, but we realize as well that both of the countries are working on improving this part of the work they're doing. So this is going to change also in the coming months. What we did is first plot all the similarities. That is what you see here on this graph. For instance, glass is recycled in Belgium and good recyclable in the Netherlands, and both have the criteria that it's without interfering substances, for example, some crystal parts. If we look at the differences, we see that that is quite less in this first plot. And that the similarities are bigger than the differences. And with some changes here and there, they will get together even more. So we have in basic, for the most of the materials, it's the same. So for a company, most of the packaging will be the same valued in both of the countries. At a conclusion, At the first glance, if you look a little bit from a distance, Belgium and the Netherlands seem very different. They have different way of organizing the collection and communicating about it. So that could lead to a different feeling. If you look more in depth, we see that we're quite similar. At a lot of points, we are similar, or we are becoming more and more alike. So we came from different points, but moving together. We serve many companies that are active in both markets and have the similar ambitions. And as organizations, we also have similar ambitions. This gives opportunities for closer cooperation and maybe even a little bit harmonization here and there. So that's it for me. Thank you for your attention and your patience.
Perfect, Karen. Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of the first session. Unfortunately, we don't have time to take any questions. There have been a few questions coming in from the audience, but what we'll try and do is we'll try and incorporate them if we have time in the panel discussion at the end of the webcast. But for now, that's the end of the first session, and in the second session, we'll move on to have a panel discussion on moving forward with design for recycling. Great. So Karen's slide, looking at the differences in the design guidelines between Belgium and the Netherlands, was a nice link into our panel discussion now. So to start, let me introduce our panel. First of all, we have Marion Beugelsdijk from Albert Heijn. Then we have Chris Bruines, who's the CEO from KIDV. We have Steven Boesemare from Fost Plus, and we also have Anne Vossen from Flarabel. Anne tried very hard to be with us today. In fact, she was even on a plane at one point, but then it got delayed by 3 hours and she had to escape, so she's joining us by video link. But welcome, everyone. So the way this is going to work, we're going to have some poll questions to the audience. The audience can give their view, and then we're going to discuss that amongst the panel. The audience members will still be able to use the system to ask questions, and we'll try and incorporate those, as I say, if we have time at the end. But the first question we have is, for design for recycling, which actor in the packaging supply chain currently has the most influence on design for recycling? So you should see the questions, but brand owners, retailers, producers of packaging, waste sorters or recyclers, municipalities, national governments, voluntary initiatives and CSR-driven activities, commission, regulators, EPR organisation or consumers. Another couple of seconds. Okay, well that's very interesting. There's a good spread across, but out in the lead there are brand owners, and we also have retailers there as well. So Marion, very good that we have you here today to give some insight from those perspectives. But it's clear as well, I think we can also see that the Commission, regulators, EPR organisations are also in there as well. So, Chris, perhaps if I start with you. So, I mean, currently, what's your view on who has the most influence at the moment?
We don't have brand owners at this table, so it's easy to say that they are responsible and have the most influence. But I think the right answer is, of course, that we all have together added an influence on design for recycling. And if I would choose, then I would say that the producers of packaging materials and the importers and producers of packed products are the most influencing actors in the whole field. But why do they do so? I think there is a new, license to operate. And I think that consumers and the society puts pressure on the market, that people will in future has less acceptance of dealing with non-recyclable packaging. So I believe that in terms of influence, society has a big influence on what's going on currently in the packaging market.
Okay, and what would be the role then, for example, of the Commission or national governments in terms of guiding this?
Well, they have to, I think they have a very important role in making steps forward by adding, add this pressure, adding their own targets and rules and regulations to prevent that we are falling back to old practices. So if we have a recyclability solution, please stay there and go further instead of going back. So it's very important, but I would also ask them not to make rules in such a sense that they rule the market in their own ideas of how packaging should be developed, because I think there's a lot of innovation going on at the moment. There are a lot of investigations, and every month or every week we see new possibilities to apply in the market. So the producers and importers and the recycling industry and the sorters are also working at better sortability. And if you look at the definition of recyclability, we are not only looking at the material to be recycled, but the whole process. So the collection, sorting, recycling, and the new market for the recyclates. So together they form the recyclability.
Brilliant. And I think we'll look later on at how we manage that innovation and changes in the supply chain in terms of the process. Anne, if you're there, I mean, we asked the question, currently, who has the most influence? Do you think that might change over time? What if we were asking the same question in 5 years from now? Who do you think might have the most influence then? Would the results be the same?
As you rightly said, Mike, there is also a keen interest of the legislator in EPR systems to go into more eco-modulation and to go into design for recycling. But what I see really as a future is that something that is market-driven has the best option on the long term. But it is a very complex matter, and therefore cross-value chain cooperation will be required, whatever you do in design for recycling. Not everybody has the whole picture, and that's why this cross-value chain cooperation is so important. And my hope really is that in 5 years' time it becomes a standard criteria like we have today: material optimization, energy consumption, water consumption, and one of the criteria that is missing today is recyclability and assessing recyclability of the packaging. But I do agree with Chris, you have to keep it open, because there's a lot of innovation ongoing, not only in packaging design, but also in sorting and recycling. And therefore, again, it's really getting the holistic approach, seeing what is happening in the sector, and going for that cross-value chain cooperation.
Great, thank you, Anne. And Marion, what can we expect from the consumer in terms of helping the supply chain, and what can we reasonably expect them to do in terms of sorting and separation at home in terms of packaging design?
Well, I think we should make it very easy for them. We should not expect too much to make very complicated deviations in the packaging that you ask consumer before throwing it away, taking everything apart and put it in separate bins. And so if something looks like plastic, it should be going in the plastic bag. If something looks like carton, it should go in the carton. Paper recycling. Also, for instance, in the Netherlands, where we do have the different types of separation, so pre-separation or post-separation, it's already quite difficult. If a consumer moves 10 kilometers in the Netherlands, it could be that he has a totally different system. So we really need to keep it simple. And in theory, you can get everything apart, but it's not really helping the consumer to do the right thing, because most consumers do want to do the right thing.
Yeah, makes sense. And Steven, how can we help the consumer do the right thing?
Well, the most obvious answer is, of course, to communicate clearly to the consumer. But there is, of course, as Marion said, there is a balance to be found. On the one hand, as a producer responsibility organization, you want to have material streams that are as pure as they possibly can be in order for them to be very efficiently sortable. You want to have efficient sorting processes, but on the other hand, you cannot ask of consumers too much. For instance, when a couple of years ago we had the introduction on the market of an opaque PET bottle, well, at that time there weren't any recycling or even sorting solutions for that packaging, but at the same time you're saying to your consumer, put in your PET bottles. Impossible. I cannot imagine that we communicate to the citizen, you can put in your PET bottles, but not the opaque ones, because that would not be understood by citizens. So communicate clearly, but once again, there is a balance to be found between all those different interests.
So the communication is vitally important, but there are limits in terms of how far it can go in terms of a complexity of that message we're sending. Yeah. Perfect. Well, perhaps we move on to our next question, which is, to the audience, in your opinion, how big is the difference between the design guidelines in the Netherlands and in Belgium? So simple answers here: very big, reasonably big, moderate, small, very small, or I don't know. Maybe you feel you haven't got enough information to answer that question. Hopefully, Karen has obviously given some insight. If you could vote on that one. Well, I think it's starting to stabilise a little bit. So I notice on the far right here, the one with the most votes actually is I don't know. So it sounds like we should run some more webinars and maybe go into some details, some further details of those differences. But seriously, I mean, if you look at where there is where people do have an opinion on this, then we're seeing kind of the moderate and the small. So no less people are seeing very big differences between the two. But I mean, how important is this? I mean, Marion, if I come to you again, I mean, how important is harmonisation? How important is it that the system in Belgium and the Netherlands is similar at all?
Well, I think it's very, very, very important because of the scale. You need scale to have a good recycling system, to have the whole chain working efficiently. But it's also important for brand owners and retailers who are working in different countries. For instance, we used to have, so I'm very happy, for instance, with the new blue bag in Belgium, because now we can put one sign on our packaging and not one for the Netherlands and one for Belgium. Because before we had, for instance, on our flexible packaging, we used to have a logo for the Netherlands that it could be in the plastic bag. And then there was very small text beneath, BA, no PMD, so no PMD in Belgium. And we really get a lot of questions in our client service from people who didn't understand because they see no PMD and they thought, but it's plastic and it says it's plastic. So in the Netherlands, where should I put it? Because I'm not allowed to put it in the PMD. So it's very confusing, again, for the consumer in the communication, but I think also to get an efficient recycling chain. Okay, so it's important from a consumer perspective, but also from a brand owner. Obviously, you have your own brand in terms of consistency, in terms of design in the different countries. And Chris, I mean, how far should we extrapolate this logic of harmonisation? I mean, should we be aiming for a harmonisation more at an EU level, beyond the Netherlands and Belgium?
Well, the correct answer to that is, of course, yes, we should aim for more harmonisation. And if you talk about harmonization of the design guidelines, I mean, you can accept differences in the system as long as the guidelines are pinpointing to one direction. So I believe, and looking at the work of Karen just presented, we can extrapolate the design guidelines in Europe to an extent that, for example, the simple rule, use monomaterials and use less inks and use less glue, and etc., are all the kind of guidelines you can apply in many countries. So in terms of guidelines, I believe we can go far in the design rules. There are also parties in Europe are already doing that. For example, Recyclas is putting forward their rules and their guidelines, and others also, as well as CFlex, for example. And so I believe there is a challenge to do that, and maybe at the first level to reach the no regret rules, which can be applied in all countries. And maybe this is the first step we could, because if we look at the difference between the Netherlands and Belgium on the system, we still have a lot of things to do together, and we are willing to do so. And if we do it, for example, with other countries as well, then maybe if we find out what the differences are, there is even a more complex matrix to be presented. But nevertheless, I think in terms of guidelines, we can make steps forward. Yes.
Excellent. So if I come now to our technical experts and innovation experts. So Steven, maybe if I start with you and then I'll go to Anne. Normally when we talk about recyclability, which is what Design for Recycling is about, we think of it in two ways, or often it's thought about in two ways. The actual design of the product, in principle it's recyclable, but of course also it needs to be recycled, it needs to be captured, it needs to be sorted, it needs to be recycled. But obviously across Europe there are differences in collection systems, there are differences in infrastructure. One country might not have enough material to build a specific type of plant. So how do we deal with that complexity in the infrastructure across Europe? Should we be thinking about recyclability on an EU single market level, or how do we manage those differences?
I think, ideally speaking, yes, harmonization on a European level, that would be the ideal situation, certainly from a brand owner's or retailer's perspective. But of course, the reality is different in the sense that despite the fact that Europe has legislated a lot, member states still have a lot of freedom in how to implement, for instance, producer responsibility for packaging. And so every member state is applying different rules in the systems that can be used, the targets that are being fixed, the level of financing that is necessary from industry. And of course, all these differences they are reflected in the operational choices that are made on the field. Which streams are you going to collect? How are you going to sort them, etc., etc. So you have a lot of differences at that point. So I would say it's not abnormal that there are still some differences today, and it will be a huge challenge if we want to go in that direction. But from the presentation of Karen, I already understood that we are converging, that we are growing into the same direction. So that's already a good starting point, I would say.
Okay, excellent, thank you. And Anne, do you have any additional comments on that topic?
Well, I indeed totally agree with what Steven is saying. There are local differences, and the same applies to sorting facilities and recycling facilities. No two plants are identical, and there are some difference in that as well. But in terms of design guidelines, there are basic principles that have to be respected, and these can be harmonized. These apply to whatever country you're in, whatever system you're using. You cannot make something that floats sink, for instance. You cannot make a color disappear without the chemical procedures. In a mechanical process, you cannot make that color disappear in a next step, in the next slide. So there are basic principles that are the key foundations into design guidelines. And then you have that extra level that is the local situation, the national situation, whether that's a different way of collecting, a different way of sorting, and maybe even going to another type of recycling process. So there's something to be said in both things. But I think what we're trying to do is get the basic principles right, and to respect those is crucial. Okay, excellent, perfect. Well, that kind of leads on in terms of those developments in technologies and recycling to our next question. I mean, there's a lot happening. Chris, you mentioned innovation in packaging design, which is continuous. There's a lot of innovation in sorting technologies, and Anne, you're busy at the moment in Denmark looking at one such technology. Recycling technologies as well. A lot of developments in mechanical recycling. We also have chemical recycling starting to emerge on the market, dissolution technologies. So there's a lot happening. So the question to the audience to see if they agree or disagree is: in time, innovations in the sorting and recycling industry will make design guidelines redundant. Do people agree with that statement? Strongly agree? Disagree? Strongly disagree? So, it's moving around a little bit still, but I think we can conclude there's no one, well, a small number of people strongly agree with that statement, but we have a definite weighting towards the disagree and the strongly disagree, although there are some differences in opinion in the audience. So Chris, maybe if I kick this to you, I mean, how do we keep these design guidelines? We've heard about design guidelines today and what's in them and what's not in them. I mean, how do we keep them current and relevant? And also, how do we start to build that into legislation? You know, the Commission is trying to look at how to do this. How do you get that flexibility, but at the same time build it in?
We keep this legislation part for later on, I think. But well, we come to that later. But I agree with the panel outcome, with the Mentimeter outcome, that I also disagree that it is making design guidelines redundant based on the fact that there is innovation in sorting and recycling, because it is an interchain process. For example, at the moment in the Netherlands, we have a few brand owners working on the flexibles, and the question is, do we innovate on the packaging side? Or is there a need to innovate on the sorting side? That's let's say, a standstill moment currently. Well, where should we work on? And the way out is, of course, that we could look at a common business case where to invest on the sorting side to make the flexibles more valuable in the future as a waste stream, or change your packaging choices in your nuts and your chips, etc., which is a huge thing to do for many big brand owners. So, of course, we need to yearly update our guidelines, but the basic of that, I think, is we should organize a better cooperation between the sorting and recycling facilities and industries and the packaging development industries, and making a round table, put them together to find out how can we deal with this new kind of business cases where there are losses and benefits, and how are the losses and benefits spread over the whole chain so there will be no losers. I think that's the big challenge for the next year.
So engagement, cooperation, communication.
Yes, and of course legislation is following that process, and I would advise legislators to look closely at what will be the outcomes of that, and try to organize a level playing field, what they call in Europe, to say, well, this is how we do it, this is how we want to organize it. Currently, there are a lot of plastics pacts going on in different countries and also on European level. But I have doubts where these plastics pacts are organized in such a way that will be the outcome. So we are still not having the right processes over there.
Brilliant, thank you. And Anne, I mean, what is the potential here for further development? Obviously, we have seen in the last few years, particularly, for example, in plastic, but not just plastic, lots of developments in mechanical recycling. How much, and in sorting, how much more is there to get? How much more development can we have in those areas?
It's a good question, Mike. And well, I can also only refer to plastics. If you look what we're doing today in terms of mechanical recycling, and in a lot of cases is just taking in the mix and mixing that, recycling it together and hope for the best and think that we have an average quality. That's not what we want. We want to go to high quality recycling, and therefore we have to innovate in new technologies, and also in mechanical recycling there are still some opportunities to be had. And also in sorting, there are a lot of different projects going on, from artificial intelligence, but also in the project that I'm involved in, as you so rightly said, Holy Grail 2, where we're looking into intelligent packaging using digital watermarks, and really seeing how that can enable smart sorting into different subcategories and then to a higher granularity than what we can actually do with standard infrared sorting that we have today. And that will enable also higher quality recycling and closing the loop into new products. So really there's both in mechanical recycling and sorting still enormous steps that can be taken in terms of innovation, with the goal to really look at the quality and improve the quality of the output of the recycling.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that the point that you made of the connection between the two, in the way that a sorting technology can actually help a downstream recycling operation in terms of how that material might be sorted or graded. So, Steven, if I come to you, I mean, if we stick with plastics for a moment, one of the, let me say, hot topics, big discussion areas is chemical recycling. What can we expect from chemical recycling, do you think, in the coming years, and how might that help us?
Well, I'm not a specialist, technical specialist in chemical recycling, but of course the tendencies are closely followed also by Fost Plus. But I hear sometimes some misunderstanding about chemical recycling, in the sense that I often hear that chemical recycling will be the solution to recycle the streams that are difficult to recycle today. I think it's a misunderstanding, because as in every recycling process, the quality of the input of such a process needs to be there. So I don't think it will be the solution for all the streams that are currently problematic in terms of recycling, but I do believe that it could be a solution to increase the quality of recycling, and specifically in the food contact recycling, where today it's only for PET that there are processes that are approved to go from to produce recycled grade to be applied in food contact applications. Chemical recycling could be an opportunity to go there for other streams, like polypropylene, polystyrene, because of the purity that you can get out of such processes. But there is, of course, also another important element linked to chemical recycling that is important to us as a producer responsibility scheme, and that's of course the aspect of legislation, because the reason why we are organizing selective collection on the field is of course to generate recycling credit, to generate tonnages that can be integrated into our results. And of course, in the sense that the output of a chemical recycling process is something else than a product that is used to make new material, it will not be accepted. For instance, if you have fuel applications as an output, at least in our country, and I believe that it is the same in the Netherlands, it will not be counted or will not be accepted as being recycling. So a lot of evolution in the last couple of years on chemical recycling, but we really need to think about what is going to be the real benefit of chemical recycling. It's going to be complementary, and in some cases, I believe it will be there to up-level the quality of recycling.
Yeah. So I guess even when the chemical recycling operations are producing plastic again and monomers again, and it's been fed into to crackers to produce monomers, there's still a need to build that into the legislation as well. Again, keeping up with these developments and innovations. Okay, brilliant. Correct. Well, in the interest of time, I think we should move on to our next question, which is: are eco-modulated fees an effective tool in convincing companies to make their packaging more recyclable? Simple on this: yes or no? Right. Well, I think it's looking fairly conclusive that that's a yes. They are an effective tool. Stephen, if I just come back to you first from EPR scheme perspective, I mean, do we know yet if this is correct that they are having an impact? Can we see yet if it's starting to change packaging design?
Well, it's still a bit early to have the broader picture, but let's say in the second quarter of next year we will have a more detailed view once we get all the declarations from our members and having the analysis on it. But as Mick told or explained during his presentation, our tariffs are indeed calculated on the basis of the principle of the circular chain deficit, which means that for every material that is sorted out, we examine what are the operational costs. We also look into the revenues or sometimes the costs for recycling and the delta between the two. This is, of course, the tariff. It means in effect that, of course, materials that are more easily recyclable, collectible, sortable, etc., they will pay a lower fee than others. And as Mick also showed, the differences are huge between the materials, and they have the tendency to increase, to even increase. And in the context we have with our members, we see that's an element that's really beginning to come into play. Surely, if you're talking about one of our tariffs is the disruptive tariff. The legislator obliges us to develop a specific tariff for packaging that is really disruptive in the processes of sorting or recycling. This tariff has to be at least the double of the highest tariff of one of the recyclable categories. And so if you go to a member who has that type of packaging, places that type of packaging on the market, and you are able to show that member that there are other recyclable alternatives available already on the market, and you show what the difference in contribution for that member is, this is something that's beginning to work. And we have of course, as KIDV also has a lot of examples, but there are evolutions to be found in different sectors. For instance, the pouches that are used for sometimes some drinks, for sometimes pet food. There you really see the evolution towards the monomaterial packaging. Or even toothpaste, even in toothpaste, where you have still some packaging that is a combination of plastic and for instance, aluminium, that the aluminium is ruled out, and that's a mono plastic. So this has a huge impact, and we believe that it has an impact on the way in which brand owners or retailers. In fact, all those companies that put packaged products on the market make their choices.
Okay, so I mean, there are certainly signs that it's having an impact. Yeah. A little too early to do a statistical analysis. It would be interesting to sit down again in a couple of years' time when there's more data to look at it from a more statistical perspective. And Marianne, in terms of eco-modulation, as a retailer and also someone with own brand products, is that what's driving you, or are there other factors as well which are influencing your decisions and your messaging to the supply chain?
Well, of course there are other factors as well. So we have a quite a very clear policy of what we want to do with our packaging. We want to have everything recyclable, not only the plastic, but so all the packaging in 2025. So that's a big challenge. But it really helps to have this eco fee because sometimes you also need to do investments, or you need to the alternative that you need to use is more expensive. So sometimes it's really because of the fee that you break even. For instance, in the Netherlands we have now quite severe test methods for the glue that you need to use on the rigid packaging to apply the label. And it has been really driving innovation in that area, for instance. We didn't have a lot of opportunities yet. We still have not opportunities for all the types of packaging that are there. For instance, it's still difficult for PE bottles and PP bottles. We don't have a good solution yet. But it's really driving innovation, and it also helps to make the move, because also for PET, sometimes you need a much more expensive label, and then you have the benefit of the eco fee, which actually balances the difference out or makes it a lot less. So that really helps to make this move.
So it helps justify the investment and the change.
Yeah.
And Anne, you spend a lot of time speaking to sorters and recyclers. I mean, what does the sorting and recycling supply chain want from eco-modulation? What are some of the challenges at the moment?
Well, I think for that sector, the main driver is to facilitate the sorting and recyclability. We all know the examples that give problems during sorting and recycling. And if we can phase them out gradually and replace them with materials that are easily recycled and easily sorted, then of course this is to benefit of the whole system. At the same time, we also have to be very careful that we don't end up with a static system and a static way of achieving this eco-modulation because that we don't know what is happening in the future or what will happen in the future. There's a lot of new innovations going on, and we are just gaining insight at the moment. At the moment, the eco-modulation is based on what is the knowledge today, based on mechanical recycling of plastics, based on what is actually on the market. But there is new technologies coming, and also these technologies have to be evaluated in terms of eco-modulation. So here, my message really is: yes, eco-modulation, it is definitely something that will help drive sorting, recycling, and high-quality recycling. But it also has to allow innovation and the introduction of new packaging formats and new packaging materials if needed.
Okay, thank you very much, Anne. So if we go to our last question, we have the waste hierarchy, as I'm sure many of the audience will be fully aware in terms of the priority in terms of reduce, reuse, recycle, recovery. So should we be focusing on design for recycling, or should we go straight to the R's, the reduce and the reuse, which are higher up the hierarchy? So again, the question is in the form of a statement to agree with. We should not focus on design for recycling, but go straight to the R's higher up the R hierarchy, such as reuse and rethink. Strongly agree, disagree, strongly disagree. So it's interesting. So with the winner, if there's a winner, if that's the right term, agree. There's quite a lot of agreement. I always say, on balance, agree with that statement. So, Steven, is it true that there is one R in particular that we should be aiming for? How do we balance our attention and our efforts across the different R's that we have? And I guess particularly from your perspective, what role can EPR organisations play perhaps in some of those the reduce and reuse R's?
Well, I personally think that the 3 R's need to be tackled actively at the same time. It's not the one or the other. The solution will not be found in one specific R. Now, speaking on behalf of Fost Plus and the mission, the role that we have in the ecosystem in Belgium, that's of course focused on the organization, the coordination, the financing of the selective collection. And as Karen also explained, in our case, for instance, the elaboration of prevention plans is something that is not at the level of Fost Plus that it is laid down, but it's at the level of the companies themselves or even their sectoral organizations. And I think that they are also an important player in this field to have, for instance, or to develop, for instance, roadmaps on, for instance, prevention. Not only prevention, because one of the things that are happening in Belgium at this moment is that there are voluntary agreements that are signed between the authorities on the one hand and the governments on the one hand and those sectoral organizations and their members to engage in the development of alternative business models. Which type of reusable packaging, for instance, can we use in the on-the-go sector to replace one-way packaging? So that's something something that is picked up at that level, the sectoral organizations and their members, and they're making progress at that point right now.
Excellent.
There's a slight difference with the Netherlands because this year we incorporated the reuse item as a part of our waste management work, which is not paid by the producers and importers because they also pay because of the recycling and the sorting and the collection costs. But the statement we currently use is if you can reuse it, it's also lowering the costs of the system which you need to recycle your packaging. So it's a part of our policy since a few months, so it's only new, but this might also be inspiration for the Belgians to take it on board as well.
Okay, so there is a role for EPR here as well in those other R's. And Anne, if I come to you on a technical point, I mean, right at the top of the hierarchy, we've got reduce. Do the 3 R's always work in harmony, if I can put it like that, or are there sometimes challenges in terms of achieving all of them? You know, for example, reduce. I mean, does it have impacts elsewhere in the supply chain? Those activities.
It's a very good question, Mike, and plastics is the excellent example. Over the years, we have been focusing on reduction and using less material and optimize the material use. And plastics is a perfect material because you can lightweight a lot and compensate for functionality losses by combining it with other materials and make it really tailor-made for specific specifications. The result is that we have found ourselves with a lot of complex packages. And now that we're focusing more on recycling and closing and going to circularity of these materials, we are facing some difficulties because of the sheer volume of these complex packages. So we have to go back to basics and ask ourselves, okay, what is recyclability and how can we improve on the recyclability of these packages? And therefore, we have to rethink, and rethink is one of them, one of the R's, and rethinking can be pushed through eco-modulation. So it's really all these elements that are crucial and have to be seen as one package deal. And you cannot just focus on one element because that will indeed have an impact on the others as well.
Okay, perfect, Anne. Thank you. I think we're starting to come towards the end of the of this section and the panel discussion. But just in terms of some closing points, I mean, Chris, first of all, obviously you're working very closely with your colleagues in Belgium on these areas and harmonisation. What are the next steps over the coming months and years?
For the coming months and years, well, we will continue on the way we have chosen to work together with Fost Plus and Valiepak to harmonise further work and to get let's say for the retailers and the brand owners a bigger marketplace for the same rules you have to comply with in the future. Maybe that's the future prospects we want to achieve, and let's start to do that in a sense that we first have this working with the Netherlands and Belgium, and later, or maybe parallel or later on, expand it to more countries, yep. Because it's still rather complex to achieve your goals. You can, of course, sit on the table with a lot of people and agree upon the principles, but you also have to implement it in your country. So that's why we have chosen to skip away the boundaries between our countries and try to make a common recyclability and waste management policy. I hope this is the right statement, because
we'll find out.
We have made a statement, and I don't know if it's the right words, but
we'll pass it to Stephen. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I fully agree. I think going back to the reasons why we've organised this webcast is coming from let's say the fact that our both countries, our both organizations have very ambitious targets, and we also have a lot of companies who are members at Fost Plus or who collaborate with KIDV or with Afvalfonds, who operate in different countries, who operate in Belgium, who operate in the Netherlands, and who have questions about providing the most uniform solutions, for the questions they have, and so that was the reason for getting together, and of course it's clearly our plan to continue and even increase that collaboration between our two organizations and see where we can harmonize, and if it's not possible, at least to know where the differences lie, so that we can make the appropriate choices with that in mind, and to the benefit, of course, of those companies that pay us to fulfill their producer responsibility obligations.
Perfect. And Marion, what are you looking for from Fost Plus and from KIDV? If I can ask in terms of support for design for recycling, what do you need as a retailer?
Well, first of all, they're helping already a lot, and I think it's very, very good to see that we're working more and more together, so that really helps. If there's one thing that I can ask for, then it's maybe to look a couple of years ahead, because we're now working on the packaging of 2025, 2030 already, and we want to know if we're moving into the right direction. And it's, I think, a bit linked to the EPR system, that you really look at the current state of the art. What can we do now? But we need to look a bit further than that, and that in that way you can really help us, because now we are creating our own vision based on the knowledge we have, and based on, for instance, C-Flex with the no regret rules. But I think for all the packaging, it would really help us if you could guide us already also for what is going to happen in 2030.
Oh.
We'll try.
But again, communication and that message is coming out, and people are working together, and that's clearly what's needed to answer those difficult questions. And Anne, you know, we've talked about some of the sorting and the recycling, but you're also active in technical work in terms of advising on packaging design and evaluating packaging design. There's a lot of brand owners in the audience today. Are there any thoughts that you have in terms of areas of focus or where attention should be focused? Yeah.
Well, if I can give one piece of advice, it's really don't try to do everything on your own, because nobody has a holistic view on every single step of the process. So reach out to other stakeholders, look for partnerships, but also challenge your suppliers, because they also hold the key, but also communicate on actually what you're doing, because I know there's a lot of innovation going on, but it's often not recognized. And the consumer today is very critical and is looking for answers on this. So also communicate exactly what you're working on. And there is no magic bullet. We have to take it step by step, looking at the different options, focusing on materials where it's easy, but there are others where it's more complicated, because we still have the functionality of the packaging to think of. So really, that's why it's so important that have that cross-value chain collaboration in here.
Great, thank you, Anne. Well, I think that brings us to the end of the panel session. It just leaves it to me to say a big thank you for everyone. Chris, Marianne, Steven, and Anne, thank you very much indeed for all of your insight on this.
And thank you, Mike, for chairing this meeting.
You're very welcome. Perfect. Well, thank you again to the audience as well, and for showing such interest in the topic. I know that KIDV and Fost Plus would be very interested in getting feedback from you on what you thought of the event. So there'll be a survey sent out by email. So if you had 2 minutes just to complete that, I know that would be very welcome. The webcast is being recorded, and it's going to be available hopefully early next week on both the website of KIDV and Fost Plus. So it's another thank you from me to the panelists, but also to our speakers that we had earlier. A huge amount of experience and a great amount of insight. So that's fantastic, and I thank you all again.